So our topic this week for this most important of modules is the rise of the individually based First Amendment and the very broad topics of sedition, incitement, and political speech. Among the most high-flying, most influential, and most famous of opinions in First Amendment jurisprudence, constitutional history, and American history are those which we will read in this module. Our story for this module is the rise of the individually centered First Amendment. And I've spoken elsewhere about the bad tendency test and the 19th century view of free speech. Just to revise, the notion there was that the community had to be protected from unpopular, unwelcome, ugly, individual minority speech. So the fringe speaker with unpopular ideas or heretical or blasphemous or radical ideas did not enjoy the absolute right to come and shock or traumatize the community with her or his speech. The individual was burdened by community disapproval and the community's ability to chill or suppress their speech until 1919 in a string of decisions that we're studying in this module. The rise of the individually centered First Amendment takes its most articulate form first in the case Schenck versus United States. It stretches then and is refined and is riffed upon and becomes a cultural touchstone in subsequent cases, including Abrams versus United States, Louis Brandeis's famous concurrence in Whitney versus California, and finally culminating in a revision of that individually centered First Amendment in the case Brandenburg versus Ohio in 1969, which narrows the state's ability to chill or suppress individual speech to a new test called the Brandenburg test, which requires incitement to imminent lawless action as the standard which justifies state intervention. So we'll start today with the clear and present danger test as laid down in the case Schenck versus United States. There are a couple of really crucial things to know about the clear and present danger test as a rejection of the bad tendency test, which as we've seen was overbroad, it was vague, it was unprincipled. It gave too much latitude to judges and majorities to burden individual speakers. So in Schenck, the court makes a move first to focus on the circumstances of speech. So as we see, the character of every act depends upon the circumstances in which it is done. Famous lines, the most stringent protection of free speech would not protect a man in falsely shouting fire in a theater and causing panic. So the first important refinement the court is making over the bad tendency test is to suggest, wait a minute, we need to think about the circumstances of a speech act. Where does the speech happen? To whom is it addressed? The second move in the clear and present danger test, and equally as important, is not just the circumstances, but also the content of the speech itself. So as we see in the second paragraph here, the question in every case is whether or not the words used are used in such circumstances and are of such a nature as to create a clear and present danger that they will bring about the substantive evils that Congress has a right to prevent. It is a question of proximity and degree. When a nation is at war, many things that might be said in time of peace are such a hindrance to its effort that their utterance will not be endured so long as men fight. Now remembering, this is a decision laid down in wartime, right? But the key moves here that the court is trying to make are two. First of all, what are the circumstances of the speech's utterance? Where are the words being used? Are they words being used in a theater falsely shouting fire? And second, really importantly, what is the nature of the words? Can the speech create a clear and present danger? Let's just stop on that for a moment. what is a clear and present danger? How can speech create a clear and present danger? If you think back to the bad tendency test, right? Words which we think might create a negative moral experience, that's not a clear and present danger. That's an idea of danger, a suggestion of danger, sort of a threat of danger, but it's not an actual clear and present danger. So that words need to create a clear, present, concrete danger in the world at the moment they are uttered. And those words need to bring about substantive evils that Congress has a right to prevent. So what is a substantive evil? Hindering the recruiting for the draft, hindering the war effort, that might be a substantive evil. Saying the president is incompetent, that's not a substantive evil. That, you might say, is a contribution to democracy. So that in the clear and present danger test, the court lays down a set of standards that need to be applied by judges in determining whether or not speech can be regulated or restricted, or that someone can be punished for their unpopular, potentially seditious, potentially radical speech. So those are, what are the circumstances? What is its nature? Does it create a clear and present danger of a crime? That's substantive evil that Congress has the right to prevent. Now, shortly after the decision in Schenck versus United States, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, in the case Abrams versus United States, revised his thinking a little bit and started to embrace a vision of free speech that is very well known to us, which we call, as a shorthand, the marketplace of ideas. Holmes's notion, as laid down in Abrams, is that the ultimate good desired by free speech is better reached by free trade in ideas, and that the best test of truth is the power of the thought to get itself accepted in the competition of the market. So the notion being that we have lots of individual decision makers who can choose to accept or reject or ignore my speech about politics or foreign policy or religion or whatever. So individual decision makers are those who are choosing or not choosing my speech. And that is telling us what is true, what is value. Right? So what Holmes is trying to do is to say it's not the state's responsibility to give us an account of the truth, but rather we as individuals are choosing the speech which we find more and less attractive, and that not only should be valued, but it also is a way for us to understand what is closer to being true, according to our collective vision. And so the second move that Holmes makes, in addition to laying down this idea of truth being created by market forces, is that the Constitution itself and free speech itself, right, is always being negotiated, right? That the Constitution, our constitutional settlement, is an experiment, as all life is an experiment. Every year, he writes, we have to wager our salvation upon some prophecy based upon imperfect knowledge. So what Holmes is driving at here is to say that we are always, as a culture, negotiating what we value and what we don't value, what we choose and what we reject. And that energy, that participatory character, is crucial to the formation of a self-governing people. And so Holmes makes the final move, which is to say, we should be eternally vigilant against attempts to check the expression of opinions that we loathe and believe to be fraught with death. So the notion being that even if I disagree violently with an opposition point of view or a radical statement, we as a culture, as a community of legal actors and of citizens, must be eternally vigilant, always very careful to make sure that we are not suppressing or chilling expressions that we loathe. Because the energy that we expend deliberating and arguing and listening and choosing truth and falsehood in the marketplace of ideas, that energy is crucial to our functioning as a free people. Now, Justice Louis Brandeis, in the case Whitney versus California, picks up Holmes's argument about the marketplace of ideas and the value of individual deliberation and individual liberties under the First Amendment, and he extends them in the direction of what is called civic courage. So for Justice Brandeis, one of the absolutely crucial features of the First Amendment is its ability to foster in all of us the ability to develop our intellectual faculties, to practice our deliberative habits of mind, right? And so that energy, that intellectual struggle that we expend in confronting or dealing with unpopular or unfamiliar or threatening ideas is crucial to our functioning as a self-governing people. And so he lays down in a very famous passage from Whitney v. California this statement or manifesto for civic courage. Those who won our independence believed that the final end of the state was to make men free to develop their faculties, and that, in its government, the deliberative forces should prevail over the arbitrary. They valued liberty both as an end and as a means. They believed liberty to be the secret of happiness, and courage to be the secret of liberty. They believed that freedom to think as you will and speak as you think are means indispensable to the discovery and spread of political truth. That without free speech and assembly, discussion would be futile. That with them, discussion affords ordinarily adequate protection against the dissemination of noxious doctrine. That the greatest menace to freedom is an inert people. That public discussion is a political duty, and that this should be a fundamental principle of the American government. Brandeis continues to say that the fitting remedy for evil counsels is good ones. The doctrine or the notion here we call counterspeech. So, if I provide evil counsels, what should your reaction be? Should you throw me in jail? Should I be silenced? Should I be fined because I've given you bad advice about foreign policy, or I've made an unpopular statement about religion or about the governor or about the course of law or racial integration? So if you don't like my point of view, should you use the power of the state to crush me? Or should you practice counterspeech? To us now, counterspeech, which is good counsels to remedy evil counsels, seems like an obvious response. But it wasn't so in the moment. It was very, very easy for 100 years ago for many people to conclude that the best way to eliminate evil counsels was to use the force of the state to fine or suppress or chill unpopular speech. So Brandeis makes a very important move in Whitney versus California, outlining the doctrine of counterspeech. The notion here is simple and to us very familiar. If we don't like, we disapprove of, or we see speech as evil counsels, the remedy, the solution, is to provide good counsels, to argue against those evil counsels, that position we find hateful. Right? To us, this seems almost obvious, but it didn't in 1923. Finally, Brandeis makes a very important move, which is to remind us of how essential time is in considering the state's ability to control speech. If there be time, he writes, to expose through discussion the falsehood and fallacies, to avert the evil by processes of education, the remedy to be applied is more speech, not enforced silence. The crucial thing here is that little note of time. If there be time, if we have enough time to educate the people or to expose through discussion and deliberation and education, The remedy to be applied is more speech. It's only when we don't have the time to use education and counter-speech to prevent substantive evils that the state is justified in controlling or suppressing speech.